Hey people, about to replace the water pump on this 1.8 Cruze engine. This one has just been leaking. Now it's leaking out of the shaft. When that happens, you will see a lot of coolant that's kind of sprayed around by the belts, and there's usually a puddle underneath the car. This one's been kept topped up with coolant all the time, so it hasn't overheated, but the leak's getting worse and worse. So let's rip into it. On the bottom right hand corner underneath the bumper here, there's usually an access point where you can reach up in and turn a little drain valve for the radiator. It's often really quite tight as well. It is plastic, so be careful if you start using some other tools on it. There is also a little outlet pipe. I'm going to try and grab a bit of hose and see if I can sit onto that pipe just to capture a lot of this coolant, because it's fairly fresh coolant, and I'm going to try and reuse it if possible. We just start winding that. You don't have to take the drain plug all the way out before it starts draining. I'm just going to let that drain out, only take a minute or so. Once the majority of that's been drained out, I'm just going to tighten that back up. Take my pipe away. Okay, we're now back up underneath the bonnet. Look, this is the Australian model. Different models in different places of the world are all slightly different, but the layout is much the same. I know some of them don't have the power steering pump here. They have an electric power steering setup. There's different O2 sensors and wiring, but the layout's going to be much like this. So the next thing I want to do is get rid of this air box. Just going to undo the clamp. Pull this wiring out of the way. It's got a little clip that comes off there. Pop that up. Just watch any clamps here that are holding any sort of pipes. And it just pulls up and away. It has these little lugs that fit into these grooves here. So to easily access the water pump, I do want to get some of these things out of the way here. Now technically I could work to try and get it in this situation here. For me, that's just too difficult. My hands just don't fit in. So I'm just going to spend about 3 or 4 minutes to take the engine mount off. And I'm also going to put a jack underneath the sump and just lift this side of the engine up just a little bit. So I've got a little bit more access here. Now the block of wood is just there just to distribute the force a little bit. So I'm just going to jack it up just so I can see a little bit of weight is taken up by this. Now we'll zip back up onto the top. Now knowing that the jack is supporting the engine, I feel confident to undo this engine mount. We'll just pull this whole engine mount out. I'll pull it out, bolts and all. If your model has the power steering pump here, you might want to just see if you can kind of push that pipe up and out of the way. Now we're starting to get better access here, but what I'm now going to do is just lift up this engine just a fraction so we can get into these bolts here a little bit easier. So I'm just using the jack to jack it up. Be careful when you're doing this, because you've got to be aware as you lift this, you are putting a fair bit of pressure on those other engine mounts. So we don't want to go too high, but I just want to be able to get a tool onto these bolts here. So I'm going to come in now with a T45 spline bit onto these. Be careful, because you don't want to chew these out, because it's going to be really difficult otherwise to get it off. I've still left the belts on, and I'm hoping that they're going to stop the engine from, or prevent it from rotating while I try and undo these bolts. Let's try the next one. Now unfortunately this is rotating the engine. As this engine rotates, I'm hoping when this tool ends up hitting this here that it will prevent from more rotation. a bit. But when it comes down to there, now we need to make sure that as you do this that it doesn't go on an angle and chew these bolts out. That's now loosened off there. So to remove the belt fully, I'm going to put a 19 or a 20 mil. Needs to be a 12-point socket so it can fit over there, and then we can take that tension off. It's a bit fiddly to get it on there. But once that's on, we can then just take the tension off, and I'll just pull it off the alternator here. Now this belt in here is loose. We've still got the belt here that drives the power steering pump. This is a stretch belt, so there's no adjustment for this. So to get this one off, I just rotate it, but I kind of pull on the belt and just get it to kind of jump a notch or two. And we just keep winding around. Watch your fingers while you're doing it. And we're nearly off. It will get out of the way like that. And I'm just going to move that belt out of my way as well. It's often very tight up against this tensioner here. So sometimes you've got to kind of just back and forth to get that belt out from between them. We can put that belt aside as well. So now that those three bolts are out, we can take this pulley off, get it out of the way. So now we've got our first good look at the water pump. One of the things I like to do is just have a look at the new one and go, okay, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts that need to come off. So that makes it easy that I'm not looking for extra bolts and making sure I don't miss one. Also, when this comes off, we're going to get a rush of coolant out of here because it doesn't all drain out when we drain the radiator. So grab a pan underneath there. This coolant from here that's going to drip out, I'm not going to reuse because it goes over the engine and can pick up dirt and oil and other stuff. There's not a lot of room, so I'm going to struggle with an impact in there, so we're going to do it old-fashioned way. Okay, so that's all 5 loosened. I'm just hoping I can grab them with my fingers. Unfortunately, it's pretty hard to get a good camera view of this because my hands get in the way. Now, as expected, it is still sitting in there. I'm going to get a screwdriver and just see if we can pry it open. There looks like a little tab here that I can pry it from. So you can pry it or just give it a bit of a knock. And I'm expecting a bit of coolant to come out when we do this. So just looking at this pump, we can see that it's been dripping. You can see the marks from where some coolant has been sitting. So, you know, look, I was confident already, but even more confident now. It doesn't feel bad on that shaft. There's no real movement or anything. It's not noisy. The seal, it looks like it actually has got a bit of silicone on here, which we'll talk about that later. But as a water pump, it was obviously still working, but just leaking out of that shaft there. So I just want to clean things up now. And there is definitely some silicone on here, just a tiny little bit. So I'm just going to try and clean that up. I'm using one of the best tools I've got at the moment, which is my thumbnail. It feels like it's got some silicone just in 1 or 2 spots, so. Now I'm just using a little bit of Scotch-Brite pad just to clean that up. Just make sure any crud that you clean off doesn't end up sitting on that little ledge in that water pump space there. Also a good time just to check that these bolts, that the threads are clear and that they're going to go back on nicely. So I've got that surface looking as clean as I can get it. Okay, so we've now got the replacement pump. This has the seal already kind of pressed onto here and it's stuck on there, so it's not going to fall off. Sometimes you have to put a dab or two of silicone just to hold the seal in place, but this one's not needing that. So we're going to run that back on. Sit it on there like that, and I'm just going to run these in finger tight. Just going to get a couple around just so it's in the right spot. As a little tip here, this is a long 8mm socket. It does fit nicely over the Torx bolts, and sometimes it's a little bit easier to get in there. So I'm just going to go around and just nip these up firm, and then we'll torque them up. I'm just steadily working my way around. Okay, with all those nipped up firm, we're going to torque this up. So the bolts for the pump are 8 foot-pounds or about 11 Newton meters. So we'll check those first. There's not a lot of room in here to do this. And to be honest, if I wasn't doing it on a video, I probably wouldn't torque these. I'll just use some common sense. But the reason I do it on a video is because everybody likes to be a critic. Next thing, I'm going to put the pulley back on. So just going to rotate that so one's directly at the top. It's just easier for me to kind of line up and see. And you can see on these bolts that they used to have a little bit of thread locker. So again, I'm just going to put a drop of thread locker on each. Now the first one's going to be the difficult one because you want to line it up. We'll run it in. And the last one, now obviously these are only finger tight. We're going to tighten them up in another minute or so. So I'm just going to quickly do these as tight as I can now. But obviously it's hard to hold that pulley. They're nice and firm. Before I put this back, I'll just make sure that this belt's in good condition. Now, the way that this belt sits is like this. We've got our crank pulley down the bottom there, an aircon pump there. Directly above it is our water pump. And then over here is an alternator. In the middle here, in the middle there is our tensioner. So it goes around here like this, up here, across to that there, back around the tensioner and back around like that. So that's the pattern that we need to get it back in. And this part here, which is what I'm going to do first, they're often right up touching each other, so it's a bit hard to slide that belt into there. I'm just dropping it down under there, and then we'll just slide it, just feed it in there. So it comes across there. Feed it over the crank. This can be a bit fiddly. Okay, so that's now roughly in place, but I'm going to put this one on first because it's easy to put this on while I can still rotate things around. Now you can get tools for these stretch belts. Look, if you're having trouble with it, look it up on YouTube. You can put clamps and stuff on there. Look, I'm pretty strong. I'll just put some brute force on it and sit it like this and then just roll it. Watching for fingers. So I've got it set up like this, and I'm literally just going to roll the pulleys until that pops into place. Just make sure that it's on all of the grooves correctly. So that's that stretch belt in place. Now we're going to get at this tensioner. So again, just make sure that your belts are all in the correct sort of grooves. Otherwise it's really hard to get it over this alternator at the back. If it's sitting in all the grooves correctly, it should pop onto there fairly easily. But look, hey, be careful getting your fingers in there because sometimes this slips off the tensioner. We're not going to put this away just yet because we're still going to need it. Now on these pulley bolts we want 15 foot-pounds, which is about 21 Newton meters. And I'm hoping that the tension is enough to hold this while I tighten them up. Otherwise we'll go to plan B. It's nice. Now I can't get into the next ones. Okay, with this back on the tensioner, just going to move a bit of the tension, rotate that back to the top so I can get to the next one. I'm wanting to do this all fairly quick because I've put that thread locker on. That's the third one, but I am going to go around and just do each one again, just to make sure. Yep, that hasn't changed at all. And just double checking the last one. And we can get this out of the way. Now these belts have had a fair bit of coolant on them, so I'm going to make sure I give it a wash off when I'm done, just because it's kind of like a sticky, greasy feel and you don't want the belt slipping. Just clean that up there. Okay, perfect time just to double check that your engine mount has no splits or cracks in it. And first thing I'm going to do is just lower this down a little bit so it's approximately in the right spot. Okay, so it sits about there. Let's keep that pipe out of the way. Okay. I'm going to put these big ones through to the body first. Just get those threads started. Now I can see here that it has creeped forward a little bit. Look, that does happen. This does have the ability to kind of flex to get things lined up. Just sit one bolt in there. Set the second. And I'm just going to lift up a fraction because it's just going to line up better with it lifted up. Excellent, so all those bolts are free just to run in now. Okay, so I'm about to tighten these up. Just make sure that it's approximately in the right position, like that's just going to push down a little bit. I'm not going to torque these, I'm just going to do them up tight. Now we can take the jack away. Okay, at this point now, I'm going to put back in the coolant that I took out. As a guide, it was about 4.5 litres, but obviously we lost some. Now, obviously with all the air that's gone in the system, look, that's just going to gurgle away for a moment, but I do want to bleed the system out as well of air. So the coolant has gone down significantly, but we didn't start with that much, and I know we've lost some, so there's still air in the system. Now these Cruzes have a bleed valve in a really difficult spot. So I'm looking in here at the top of the radiator, and you can see this white plug in here. This white plug in here is a bleed valve. So if I open that, it'll let out any air that's trapped in the top of this radiator, and our coolant levels can go down a little bit more. It's a difficult one to film, but this is why I like to not have the air box in, and with a long screwdriver. Look, a Phillips would be better, but look, this will do. We can run it in there. And undo this bleed valve. Now, why I'm undoing this, we may even see the coolant drain down a little bit more, but you usually can hear the air coming out. So I can hear air kind of just hissing out of there now. I don't have to take that drain plug out fully. I'm getting a little bit more gurgling in the reservoir over there, and I can see that level is going down. I'm going to keep doing this till I see coolant coming out of that hole, which it now is, and I'm going to now tighten it back up. Okay, now that is the air that's bled out from the top of the radiator. Look, there is still going to be air pockets in this when we start it up, and I may need to do that again, but we'll just watch and see. Next, I just want to fit this air box in. Make sure that these aren't cracked or broken here. Sometimes people are a bit rough when they pull them out and they snap them off. Just kind of slides down into place. Before I do that, just note that this part of the rubber here actually fits into that other sort of plastic fitting there. It doesn't sit on top, it sits into, and that's the plastic then sits up onto there. So it should sit in there quite neatly. Just needs a little bit of wiggling. Then those points line up and you can just press them down and in. Down and in. I've got this pipe that needs to sit in that clip there. And we'll put this clamp in place. Also, don't forget our MAF airflow sensor. It slips into there, slips in there, and then we lock that in position. Now with that done, I'm going to start it up and we're going to watch this coolant level. Okay, now with the engine running, I'm obviously looking for any leaks or problems. Also, because we've had the drive belts off, I'm just looking for any issues with these drive belts or the tensioner, and that's all running how it should. I am keeping a very close eye on the coolant there. That will begin to settle down a little bit. I'm going to run the car for a little while like this, just idling. I don't have the cap on yet. I want to start to feel some heat from the heater. Note too that I don't have the aircon on, because I don't want the compressor running and the cooling fans on just yet. I just want some heat built up in the engine and obviously then in the heater core. We're probably going to need to top that up a little bit after a few minutes of running. Then what we're going to do is put the cap on and take it for a drive and make sure that everything's A-OK. If you have access to a pressure tester, I'd definitely advise you do that because that's a quick and easy way to check for any leaks. Hey look, thanks for watching. Comments, questions, tips, leave them below and check out some other videos.